Morning, evening, or afternoon. All right, looks like I'm going to have to really project my voice. Seems to be a little on the muffled side. That's okay. All right. And I guess we'll go ahead and get TikTok started. And away we go. All right. Good morning, evening, or afternoon, depending on what part of the globe you're on and what time zone you are in. Guess I'll have to turn down that echo. That's all right. Let's see. Looks like we've got two microphones on. And now we've got one. Okay. All right. And I'm just now figuring out how this all works. Please let me know in the comments how the audio is doing. Okay. All right, we're going to get started. American Crusade, that is what. All right, yeah, keep me updated on both YouTubes. I would appreciate that. Mm. Oh, wow, wow, wow. Let me get rid of this. Okay. Not sure how to get rid of this. All right, we're just going to have to ignore it for now. It's here, it's in the way, it doesn't matter. Okay. So how is everybody's morning doing today? So for those of you who are watching, lurking, listening, we are on TikTok and to YouTube. So thank you so much for tuning in, not tuning out. I appreciate that. Appreciate that. Okay. Just keeping an eye on everything. Okay, yes, thank you 420. I appreciate that. So I'm going to keep an eye on everybody. So we've got 420, Sweet Pea. Thank you so much. All right. Without further ado, let's get started. So, for those of you watching, we are going to be doing American Crusade, and yes, it is backwards. Now I got to figure out how to unmirror this. Why does it do that? Ay, ay, ay. Sound effects. Audio mixer. No. it does that. American Crusade. But you could, I mean, you can see what it. Well, I've got the photo right up ahead. Let's see. Okay, advanced audio settings. Nope. Scene transition. Nope. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry, I can't unmirror it right now. I think what happened was I had it mirrored and it should have stayed mirrored. I don't know why. It's different from the phone and desktop. That's interesting. Chapter 9, Restoring Christian Supremacy, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. I do not think we have to discriminate against anyone to protect the faith-based community. This was Georgia Governor Nathan Deal when vetoing a state RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This was in the 1990s. This was before Georgia went MAGA. Or you could say crazy. Okay. In stopping the runaway train, the court put itself squarely on tracks. Scalia's tough shit minorities passage united liberals and conservatives. They asked Congress to do what Scalia dared, pass legislation giving religion the unworkable blanket exemption. Congress obliged Scalia with the new superstatute, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. RFRA remade religious freedom and ordered the court to interpret religious freedom protections differently from then on. The political rhetoric surrounding RFRA made it clear that the entire purpose was to undo this Supreme Court decision, to correct Scalia's wrong. Congressional supporters mentioned the Supreme Court countless times during RFRA debate. Our religious rights have been under siege. In 1990, a single Supreme Court decision abolished the standard that protects religious freedom in this country, and one representative. The Supreme Court's decision 3 years ago transformed a most hallowed liberty into a mundane concept with little more status than a fishing license, said a 40-year-old veteran of the House, attacking the sorry legacy of the court's view of this matter. When Senator Joe Biden introduced RFRA in the Senate, he said that the drug counselor's decision will erode religious freedom. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Biden also invoked the decision in his opening remark at the Supreme Court confirmation hearing of David Souter, as did others. Well-intentioned though some legislators were, the RFRA became the fulcrum with which crusaders would seek to reshape our understanding of religious freedom in the First Amendment. They'd redefine religious freedom as a concept under the statute RFRA. First, then under the Constitution, the First Amendment. By its own terms, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act didn't redefine, but rather restored religious freedom. Yes, please order this book. It is on sale on Amazon. It went from $27, $28 to $18. So get it while the getting's good. Yes. Get your own copy today at Amazon.com. Oh, I should have included a link. I'll remember that next time. Let's see. By its own terms, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act didn't redefine but rather restored religious freedom to a gold standard the courts supposedly abandoned in the drug counselor case. In restoring that standard, the Congress advanced Christian supremacy. If inadvertently, this would have been avoided with more careful attention to line number 3. But the mistake is also inexcusable given the clear problems of RFRA. First, RFRA cuts across every single law past, present, and future, hence superstatute. That effectively makes RFRA a constitutional amendment passed outside the required amendment procedure. Second, RFRA violates the separation of powers because Congress ordered the Supreme Court to interpret a constitutional protection in a certain way, a role that the Constitution reverses for the courts. Third, RFRA privileges believers compared to everyone else, crossing line number 3. Then there is the flawed standard of RFRA, sought to restore an aberration As one leading scholar put it, the oddity was based on a few cases deciding in favor of minor Christian sects in the narrow context of unemployment benefits, into which the drug counselor case and explosive elements also fell. These cases were the runaway train the justices were worried about. In those earlier cases, the court was careful to say that there is no absolute constitutional right to unemployment benefits for all persons whom religious convictions are the cause of their unemployment. On three separate occasions, however, it granted benefits after framing their denial at the state forcing employees to choose between fidelity to religious belief and work. We only need to look at the case first in this niche area of religious freedom because the subsequent cases were based on it. That 1963 case is not the gold standard for determining how the Constitution solves conflicts between religion and the law. It's fool's gold. A pre-existing constitutional violation of line 3 taints the entire case. Christian supremacy written into the law and ignored by the court. Mandatory Sunday closing laws. So, our FRA restores a standard that forced every citizen to honor the Christian God because of an old law that was openly hostile to non-Christians and obliterated line 3. Adele Shelbert became a Seventh-day Adventist about 2 years before the conflict between her new religion and her employers boiled over. Sherbert had worked for 35 years at Spartan Mills, a textile mill in Spartanburg, South Carolina. The textile industry was struggling to compete with imports. So Mills, seeking competitive edge, mandated 6-day weeks up from 5. That meant Saturday shifts because the state law closed all manufacturing on Sunday to honor the Lord's Day. But the Seventh-day Adventists observed the Sabbath on Saturday. Thank you, yes. Thank you for the link. Sherbert missed 6 successive Saturdays and was fired. She found other work, but nothing that let her worship and rest on Saturdays. 150 other Seventh-day Adventists had no problem finding work. She was denied unemployment because she was fired for misconduct. She missed work. The Supreme Court's opinion in Sherbert's case is short. The denial of benefits forced her to choose between following the precepts of her religion and forfeiting the benefits, on the one hand, and abandoning one of the precepts of her religion in order to accept work, on the other hand. The court flubbed line 1 and 2. Those obvious errors made the case so aberration. According to Professor John Ely, who taught at Yale, Harvard, and Stanford law schools, and was the 4th most cited American legal scholar. But the real problem was the Lord's Day. South Carolina imposed one version of Christianity on all of its citizens, and courts repeatedly upheld this constitutional violation. Had the state not imposed this holy commandment on Sherbert or her employer, she could have worked the 6-day week. This violation of line 3 got her fired. Emperor Constantine probably selected Sunday as the Christian day of rest, partly to distinguish the new Christian religion from the Jewish Sabbath, and partly to make it easier for pagans to convert by keeping the same holy day on which they had worshipped the sun, or so the story goes. It's a fascinating historical rabbit hole and a religious dispute to this day. But the state of South Carolina imposed the religious edict on all citizens and made it unlawful for an employer to require or permit an employee, especially a woman, to work in a mercantile or a manufacturing establishment on a Sunday. South Carolina Sabbath laws, which had been repeatedly challenged and upheld by the state's courts, which brushed off arguments about the laws forcing non-Christians to observe the Christian Sabbath. South Carolina courts invariably rejected these challenges by citing an 1846 case, the first such challenge these courts rejected. First, S.A. Benjamin, a Jewish merchant, was sold one pair of gloves on Sunday, was fined $40 for violating the Sunday closing law. Benjamin argued that this law violated his religious freedom. He lost. The court obliterated line 3, an opinion that's a favorite of today's Christian nationalists. Judge John O'Neill, later Chief Justice of South Carolina's highest court, penned the decision against Benjamin. O'Neill often used the power he possessed to influence people to convert to Christianity. He owned about 150 slaves and published the Negro Law of South Carolina, in which he argued against a law prohibiting slaves from learning to read because, as Christians, how can we justify it that a slave is not to be permitted to read the Bible? The best slaves in the state are those who can and do read the scriptures. I'm going to repeat that last line just to be sure you didn't miss it. The best slaves in the state are those who can and do read the scriptures. O'Neill was president of the Newberry Baptist Bible Society and the Bible Board of the Baptist State Convention, and as a young boy, he memorized chapter and verse. Ooh! O'Neill's opinion in Benjamin's Sabbath Challenge is breathtaking for its willingness to legislate his personal Christianity and admit that Sunday closing laws impose Christianity on everyone. O'Neill declares that the Christian religion is part of the common law of South Carolina. His opinion reads like a religious text. Christianity robed in light and descending as the dove upon our ancestors. O'Neill upheld the Sunday closing law to uphold biblical law. It is simply an ordinance for the better observance of the Lord's Day. He continues, the Lord's Day, the day of resurrection, is to us who are called Christians, a day of rest after finishing a new creation. It is the day of the first visible triumph over death, hell, and the grave. It was the birthday of the believer in Christ. O'Neill defended Sunday closing laws on theological grounds. He imposed that theology on everyone because he wrongly thought that Christianity is the law. It was legally wrong, morally reprehensible, and unconstitutional in that O'Neill abused civil power and imposed his his personal religion on everyone. O'Neill's opinion shows precisely why Sunday closing laws should be struck down. Instead, such a law was adopted by the Supreme Court via Sherbert's case, and then by Congress via RFRA in 1993. And it's Baptist interesting and why people don't ask where that religion came about. Well, as a former Baptist, I can tell you it is wild, some of the stuff that we like to impose on everybody. We impose, because I'm not there anymore. But anyway, let's keep reading. The Supreme Court got this right on other occasions. In 1985, it invalidated a Connecticut law requiring employers to give employees their Sabbath off because the statute arms Sabbath observers with an absolute unqualified right not to work on whatever day they designate as their Sabbath, which imposes their religion on the employer and other employees. And this unyielding weight in favor of Sabbath observers over all other interests contravenes a fundamental principle of the religion clause. This isn't precisely the same as mandatory Sunday closing laws, but shows the path the court should have taken to avoid the problem in the Sherbert's case. The Supreme Court's failure to deal with Sunday closing laws was the true problem with Adele Sherbert's case. The court even recognized the problem. Significantly, South Carolina expressly saves the Sunday worshipers from having to make the kind of choice which we're here to hold infringes the Sabbatarians' religious liberty. But for the law, Sherbert could have worked 6 days. Professor Marcy Hamilton and Leslie Griffin explain, if the court had struck down Sunday mandatory closings, Sherbert would never have been unemployed for her Saturday adherence. The law would have applied equally to Saturday and Sunday Sabbath worshipers, as it should. Her willingness to work on a day most might want off would have been more valuable to her employer. The Christian law got her fired. And that is effectively state discrimination against a religious minority, in the way that the drug counselor case is not. The state burden on Sherbert's religion from line 3 violation is real. The Supreme Court recognizes the religious discrimination which South Carolina's general statutory scheme necessarily affects, but utterly failed to redress it. This is what RFRA restored: religious discrimination and Christian supremacy. The justice framed the unemployment benefits cases as a forced choice. The government forced unemployed believers to choose between a government benefit and their religion. But the Sunday closing law is what got Sherbert fired. The drug counselors, however, had already made that choice when they took the job. When they were fired, they were surely worse off. But that was not, as Scalia mistakenly thought, because of the nature of the democratic society, but because of the demands of their gods. Having personal conviction is hard. Having the courage of those convictions is harder. It's up to believers to shoulder their personal religious burdens. If they can force others to bear that burden by claiming religious freedom, then that protection has become a weapon. The court's forced choice framing also implicates line 3. Effectively, believers are asking us to pay them to have the courage of their convictions. That expectation is interesting, especially in Supreme Court litigation in which recent converts are overrepresented. Sherbert had converted just a couple of years before the case. Another recent Seventh-day Adventist convert won at the Supreme Court in 1987, relying on Sherbert's case. The drug counselor case stated similarly: Galen Black, a white guy with obsessive-compulsive tendencies, diving into a Native American religion. Kim Davis, too. The zeal of a convert spurred their fights, but at least some were, presumably, of the majority caste, accustomed to legal favor and privileges of a loosely enforced line 3, not the disadvantages. They fought like members of the privileged caste, expecting the law to bend to their religion. Line 3 means the government cannot pay people to worship. I'd chip in a few bucks to help out Al Smith, and I wish our safety nets were more just and forgiving. But had he won, the government would be required to use its taxing powers to take out our money and give it to someone because they were religious. The fired for cause rule meant that any other drug counselor fired for doing drugs wouldn't get unemployment benefits, only the pious peyote users. Justice John Marshall Harlan and Byron White denounced this in Sherbert's case. The state, in other words, must single out for financial assistance those whose behavior is religiously motivated, even though it denies such assistance to others whose identical behavior, in this case inability to work on Saturdays, is not religiously motivated. Chief Justice Rehnquist dissented with his same observation in a similar case, finding it absurd that a state could be continually required to provide direct financial assistance to a person solely on the basis of his religious beliefs. This amounts to paying believers to exercise those religious beliefs. It's no different than paying them to go to church. That is unconstitutional. Instead, we must ask them to have the courage of their convictions. Yes, please. Thank you for sharing the live. Please double tap that screen. I would appreciate it. Become a skeptic. Hit that orange heart and join us. We'd love to have you. And please consider subscribing. Please reset your goal. Okay, I don't know if I can do that from here. Let's do live goal. If it'll let me. Oh, there you are. Pin your live goal. Got it. I've got squirrels. Save. Okay. Let me know if you see that. Gift gallery. Okay. The squirrels are not available. Huh. What is going on? All right, let's go back to roses then. Not sure why. We'll do hearts. How about that? All right. Let me know if that shows up. Heart me. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone. All right. Let's keep on reading. As they had for much of North American history, Crusaders used and abused Native Americans. They took advantage of liberal sentiment against the ethnocentric Supreme Court opinions in Native American cases to build up sentiment for expansive, transgressive religious freedom. They allied with equally minded lawyers, scholars, and Native Americans to pass a law enshrining their privileged vision, RFRA. A slew of state versions of RFRA followed. Beginning in the mid 1990s, scholars characterized those as uncontroversial, bipartisan, non ideological efforts until 2010, until the Supreme Court called for the Crusade, when the sinister possibilities in these laws began emerging. Republican controlled states continued to pass more RFRAs, including Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Indiana. By 2013, liberal, progressive, and equality activists were fighting, often successfully, an all out war against these religious freedom bills and laws. Like thankful pilgrims begging assistance only to turn around and slaughter their neighbors, the Crusaders had weaponized the restored vision of religious freedom. Liberals helped realize and turned it against them. By 2014, desperately working to obstruct our first black president and women from getting reproductive health care, the Crusaders finally pushed RFRA beyond what the liberals understood and intended in the Hobby Lobby case. Yes, Native Americans have been used as cudgels. Oh, we're getting to the best part. Let's see. Pin. Okay. All right. Hope that works. Yes, we're getting to the best part. Number, let's see. Chapter 10, The War on Women. The Burrell versus Hobby Lobby stores. Oh, it gets better and better, folks. I'll tell you what, these Christian nationalists have no shame at all. No shame in their game. Yeah, oh yeah. Uh, Legal carve outs. Exactly. Are you opposed to giving native exceptions? The problem is these native exceptions were not demanded by natives. It was a white guy who who dove into religious Native American ceremonies, and he got into peyote drug use, and he wanted the courts to give him the freedom to be able to use peyote while on the job. Uh, Actually, I don't know if I can accept a guest right now, but we'll see after chapter 10. I'll see if I can bring out up a guest. Okay, keep an eye on those who are selecting P if you're able to, and then we'll get to it. Wow, I we got through this chat. We got through that first chapter in 27 minutes. Not bad. But what's interesting is the Native Americans were not asking. They didn't ask for this guy to jump in and, how do I say this, use their religion for his own ends. And and remember, this guy was a drug counselor. Okay, he he was using the Native American religion in order to be able to use drugs while on the job as a drug counselor. So, uh, I mean, I guess if you, and also he had signed a an agreement that he would not use drugs. Yeah, exactly. He came into the religious ceremonies. Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. Let me, you know what? Let me move the comment section right here. Okay, that way I can see it better. There we go. That's so much better. Thank you so much for joining. Please, please send those gifts. Double tap the screen. What? How many likes are we? 2,000? That's not That's not bad. 3,000. All right. Thank you so much. Please keep double tapping that screen. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Let's see. What else? What else? What else? Okay, well, let's get into the Hobby Lobby case. This is from Jessica Valenti. By the way, if you are not subscribed to Jessica Valenti, I believe she does videos, but she does newsletters. She does the Abortion Everyday update where she talks about reproductive health. So please, if you're subscribed to Jessica Valenti, feminist author, she says, what's at stake is a decision like this, and in a debate like this is woman's basic humanity. We cannot get this twisted. An attack on women's reproductive rights is an attack on women, full stop. The Crusaders' strategy for the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was simple yet cunning. Weaponizing religious freedom under RFRA, then under the First Amendment, redefining religious freedom under RFRA would be easier than altering the First Amendment to the Constitution, because RFRA was basically a blank slate that privileged religion. The strategy was to pick off the easier target and then migrate that version of religious freedom to the First Amendment. 20 years after Congress passed, the Crusaders accomplished step one in the Hobby Lobby case. They rewrote line 2 under RFRA. Yes, it is. The writing's on the wall. Were you against the congressional decision in 1996? You'll have to give me. I think in 1996, if I'm not mistaken, that is when they basically wrote against this so-called religious freedom. If that's what you're talking about, then yes, I am in favor of that. But if it's something else, let me know, okay? Justices Alito, Scalia, Thomas, Kennedy, and Roberts, 5 Catholic men, decided that billionaires should use the legal structure of a multi-billion-dollar company, effectively robbing the employees of their right to preventive health care. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, known as ACA or Obamacare, required large employers, 50 employees or more, to provide health insurance to their employees. To implement that law, the Obama administration promulgated new regulations that required health insurance plans to cover essential healthcare services at no cost to the patient, including important preventive health care like wellness visits, contraceptive counseling, and HPV screening. Those regulations became known somewhat misleadingly as the contraceptive mandate. Every administration pushes their own agenda. Why are you complaining now? You haven't been paying attention, have you? Okay, all right, that's fine. Yes, I can bring you up and we can talk about that. That's fine. Let me finish this chapter and then we'll see if we can bring up guests. Not a problem. I have no problem with that. Let's see. And they expanded healthcare for Americans. Crusaders targeted the administrative rules. All told, over 100 lawsuits were eventually filed against this benefit. The Beckett Fund filed a slew of lawsuits, as did the Alliance Defending Freedom. These two crusaders brought the cases that would be combined in the Hobby Lobby decision. There were 2 big exceptions to the contraceptive mandate. First, the regulations exempted churches and other religious groups. Sensibly, the religious exemption did not extend for for-profit companies. Second, any employer could pay taxes in lieu of providing employees health insurance. The taxes ensured that the cost of covering its employees' health care wasn't passed on to the taxpayers. Okay, not a problem, Will. Although at $2,000 per employee per year, the tax was significantly less health coverage, which was about $4,000 to $12,000 a year. If the employer provided health insurance that the insurance didn't meet the coverage requirements, it paid higher taxes, $100 per employee per day or $36,500 per employee per year. As we will see on the following pages, Hobby Lobby could have saved money and adhered to its owners' medieval beliefs by simply paying the taxes and not providing health insurance. the motivation, misogyny. Let's not get it twisted. It's misogyny. The Crusaders don't view women's reproductive health as health care. They believe that birth control is for sluts. Like Mike Huckabee preached to the Republican National Committee that the mandate existed because the women of America cannot control their libido. Mike Huckabee, I have a few questions for you. How in the name of fuck are these women getting pregnant? Mike Huckabee, how do you think pregnancy happens? Does it just, do they catch it in the air? Is that how this works? I will go on record and I will say this. Every pregnancy and every abortion is caused 100% by men. That's it. Andrew Seidel's podcast is pretty bad ad. I do not understand what is going on. I did not know Andrew Seidel had his own podcast. I will have to look into that. If that's what I think you're talking about, I don't know. Oh, he's just bad behind the mic. Wow. Not everyone is meant to be live entertainment. Well, you know what? I do my best. Let's move on. Mike Huckabee, I said that. Okay, he's a douche. Okay, though he tried to hang that slander on Democrats, Crusaders seem to imagine quite vividly one expects pill-popping women wantonly coupling. The stultified religious objection is that contraception comes between women and the natural consequences of their action, between women and the Crusaders' God. Abortion and contraception rob this particular God of his ability to punish harlots with motherhood. Yes, yeah, that makes sense. He's either a guest or he is actually. Oh, I think he must be a full-fledged member of FFRF, maybe employed by them. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. It's been a while since I've tuned into the FFRF podcast. That is Freedom from Religion Foundation. His podcast is called One Nation Indivisible. I'll have to look into that. I want to support him in any way I can. I'll look into that. Well, thank you for letting me know what's going on, because I had no idea. Anyway, God's impotent wrath and the frustrated consequences tellingly never applied to the women's partner. Oh no, a tradition well established in the Bible itself. Patriarchy and reproductive rights are inversely related. Racism also motivated the attempt to damage the landmark legislation of Obama's first black president, and him in the process. Obamacare itself began as a slur on the ACA, a racist dog whistle, according to data. Then wrapped in religious freedom, racism and misogyny are sufficiently disguised to enter mainstream discourse. But righteous blowhards like Huckabee tend to say the quiet part out loud. Rush Limbaugh said it the loudest. The radio host and commenter, a known bigot, abused a 30-year-old Georgetown law student for testifying before Congress about whether religious organizations should be exempt from ACA contraceptive coverage regulations and to what extent. Sandra Fluke refuted the Crusaders' assumption that all women who take birth control are sluts. She understandably opted not to lay bare her personal medical history, but explained that people take birth control for many reasons beyond sex, including a friend who has to take prescription birth control to stop cysts from growing on her ovaries. About 1.5 million Americans, including one-third of teens, use birth control pills exclusively for non-contraceptive purposes, and only 42% took those pills exclusively for preventing pregnancy. And yes, people can, should, and do take it to enjoy sex. It's a brilliant invention. Yes, exactly, Maureen. That is a good enough reason in my book. Rush Limbaugh has been sober for 4 years. Good on him. Edward DS Dilemma. I smell what you're stepping in, and I like it. Let us all take a moment of silence and observe and appreciate Rush Limbaugh's sobriety. I'll drink to that. Thank you for the glasses. You know what's amazing? I used to listen to him in high school. Unbelievable. The time that I wasted listening to that blowhard, I'll never get it back. It's so sad. Thank you for the likes. I appreciate it. Let's keep reading. Simply by stating reality, Fluke threatened the slut assumption, so Limbaugh crucified her viciously. He hurled so much invective that her testimony was lost in the tumult. And that was the point. Limbaugh attacked Fluke as a slut, a prostitute who wants to be paid to have sex, who's having so much sex she can't afford the contraception, and who wants taxpayers to pay her to have sex. Limbaugh resumed hostilities the next day. He called women who want contraceptive feminazis and said, if we're going to pay for your contraceptives and thus pay for you to have sex, we want something for it. We want you to post the videos online so we can all watch. This little creep. Well, actually, he was a pretty big creep. Wow. I mean, that's where his mind went. Let's all watch. Of course. Of course he would think that. President Trump awarded Limbaugh the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2020. Mitt Romney tried to be more circumspect when he said of Limbaugh, it's not the language I would have used. Oh my goodness, Mitt Romney, your courage is just wow. As Maureen Dowd asked in the New York Times, is there a right way to call a woman a slut? Limbaugh bared his own misogyny, but also showed the true colors of the religious freedom challenge to contraception. This fight was part of a war on women, and religious freedom was simply a new weapon in that war. One Texas state representative with an apt name, Wayne Christian, told the Texas Tribune, of course it's a war on birth control, abortion, and everything. The Crusaders don't see women as full people worthy or capable of self-determination. Women shouldn't have agency over their bodies or reproduction. Men should. Catholic bishops and Christian billionaires should. Writing for The Guardian, Jessica Valenti explained, what's at stake in a decision like this and in a debate like this is women's basic humanity, of which sexuality is an integral part. Yes, contraceptive is about health, and women often need birth control for medical reasons. But we also need it for sex, and that's just fine. 5 Catholic men infantilized women and robbed them of their agency in the Hobby Lobby decision. Noticeably absent from the decision, the Supreme Court journalist Dahlia Lithwick explained was the very notion of the woman herself as a moral circuit breaker, as an agent of her own ethical choices and preferences, whose decision to obtain an IUD or a condom or a morning after pill is a fully autonomous moral choice that supplants the spiritual choices of her employer. While women fought for that basic recognition of their humanity, the Crusaders opposed them. Misogyny and racism motivated the attack on the ACA, and then the attack was justified morally with religion and legally with religious freedom. The challenge, religious freedom. The Green family is among the 100 richest Americans, worth over $4 billion. We're Christian, and we run our business on Christian principles, wrote David Green, patriarch of the family that controls the Hobby Lobby chain, in a 2012 USA Today op-ed. The op-ed also announced that this is for-profit S subchapter corporation, owned by several layers of legal trusts which Green controlled. Not only believed that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior, but also that this corporation was suing in federal court over the contraceptive mandate. David Green comes from a family of Christian preachers. His Christianity is not what one might call humble. For me, For me, I want to know that I have affected people for eternity. I believe once someone knows Christ as their personal savior, I have affected eternity. I matter 10 billion years from now. Why why are these people obsessed with mattering a million years from now? Green's three adult children run the Hobby Lobby empire. Steve Green, the second son, is the CEO of Hobby Lobby Stores Incorporated. He's also the driving and economic force behind the desperately overdone Museum of the Bible in D.C. Didn't the Museum of the Bible, didn't that go, didn't they just close down not too long ago? I just, oh my goodness. Ugh. Oh, things happen so fast. I'll have to look into that. Is the Museum of the Bible still in existence? Hello, puppet. The Greens use their wealth and power to proselytize. Hobby Lobby buys annual 4th of July ads that misleadingly alter and edit quotes from the founding era in a disingenuous attempt to prove that America is a Christian nation. It's not closed? I can't wait till it is. Oh, right. And all made in China. God bless our home. Yes. Isn't that interesting? What's up? What's your problem with God and his followers? God's fan club is the worst fan club. Truth must be spoken here. Bearing false witness, perhaps, but not illegal. Christians, I mean, in order to enforce their belief, they have to lie. It is almost a prerequisite. Just like the gospel authors lied about Old Testament scripture to justify whatever the Messiah, Jesus. They did the same thing. Was China right to restrict religious proselytizing? Uh, I don't care. I'm not in China. The atheists are the ones that are pushing an agenda to teach men and women are men. uh, you know, the majority of I think you're trying to cast a slur on trans men and women. Did you know the majority of them are Christians themselves? I believe China was right. Look at their country. Um, well, here's the thing. China economically, they have been working on their economic philosophy for over 75 years. They've been slowly and methodically plodding along. And I have to say, the life, the quality of life in China, it's really, really, really hard to argue against their system. It really is. You go to China sometime, they have things that we don't, I mean, we wouldn't have in 100 years because of the backward idiots we keep. Um, Ask a Uyghur about their quality of life. Well, correct. Not everybody is benefiting. Well, you know what? Ask the normal citizen here about their quality of life. Ask a veteran who risked their life for this country about their quality of life. Ask the senior citizen who's about to lose their home because their benefits have been shut off. Ask them what their quality of life is. Ask the average American working class what their quality of life is. And then you can come back to me about the Uyghurs. Oh, we're going to have a fun conversation, I can already tell. Right. I wonder what it's like to live in a country that invests in its citizens. For all of China's faults, they do that. Amazing. You know what's amazing? Kudos to China. They won't allow Christianity. No. You can be a Christian in China. They're not keeping Christianity. It just you have to be registered. There are Christian churches in China right now. What they object to are the Christians who believe they are more powerful than the state. They believe they have the right to disregard laws. Those churches get bulldozed. I've seen videos of those churches get bulldozed. But yeah, it's but you there are Christian churches there today. You can go visit them. You can't hold office in China and be a Christian. Will, you say that as if it's a bad thing. The churches have to be controlled by government. No, you just have to be registered. Yeah. You prefer democracy? Really? If you voted for Trump in the last election, you do not care for democracy. We'll find out. I'll ask you when you come up. We'll see how much you value democracy. Okay. Let's say bearing false witness, which Christians do on a regular basis, but it's not illegal. Nor is using the Museum of the Bible to push Green's particular brand of Christianity under a thin veneer of scholarship and ecumenical. Let's say that again. Ecumenicalism. The gift shop hawks Steve Green's Faith in America. The book cover features one of Hobby Lobby's deliberately misleading July 4th ads. The book is full of these misleading quotations and is mostly Green recounting a conversation with Christian propagandist David Barton. Oh, and the shipping containers being empty. Yeah, that's interesting. I tell you, every time you vote Republican, it puts the economy in the toilet. Every time. I just think concentration camps are bad. Well, no, actually, no, that's not true. You do not believe that uh, concentration camps are bad. You're actually all in favor of them, aren't you, Will? Yeah, you were okay with um, brown people being thrown in cages. You were okay with Mexican Christians being thrown in cages. You were fine with that. In fact, you probably cheered it based on the way you're talking in my chat. I don't know that for sure, but yeah, I can almost bet money on that. There's nothing quite like Christian hate, or there's nothing quite like hate like Christian love. Is the yeah, that is true. MAGA misinformation. Yeah, I mean they distort history. They distort everything, all in favor of their religion. That that is scary. Everybody should be scared about that, you know? But what are you going to do? Your show is excellent. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate that. Become a skeptic. Join the skeptic team. Um, I've got there's the subscription option. I don't see my heart option or the to join the skeptic team. I have to figure out how to. Yes, my fan club. That's right. Okay. Team members. Let's see. Okay. Yes, but please become a skeptic. Hit that orange heart and join the skeptic team. I'd love to have you. Okay, moving on. I've got to get through this. The book's cover features Hobby Lobby. I read that. The museum is similarly misleading. It's also plagued with legal troubles, which Alison Frankel summarized for Reuters. In 2017, Hobby Lobby paid $3 million and forfeited more than 140 ancient artifacts to resolve U.S. Justice Department allegations that the pieces were illegally imported into the United States. In March 2020, the museum disclosed that its Dead Sea Scroll fragments were modern forgeries. Then in May 2020, the museum sent more than 13,000 artifacts back to Iraq and Egypt before determining that their provenance was questionable. These sons of bitches were going on the black market and buying artifacts during. So this was during the height of the war on terror in Iraq. They were trying to buy old manuscripts, artifacts that had to do with Christianity. These motherfuckers were buying them off the black market. Remember, these were artifacts that were stolen. Uh, Buildings, religious temples. Thank you for joining the team. I appreciate that. Um, Temples. Well, like the British Museum, maybe. Actually, you know what? I'm going to agree with you on that one. The British Museum, yeah, they have a long sordid history of stealing artifacts from other countries. It's not like they were donated. Crazy, never knew this makes sense. Yeah, I'm telling you, man. These people are disgusting. The Green family is dirty. The Hobby Lobby owners are filthy, dirty, and they have no shame. They don't care. It's all good. What are you gonna do? You know, what are you gonna do? How long till looted museums become okay? Well, I'm okay with one museum getting looted, and actually, you know what? I just want it closed down. I don't care. There's nothing in there. There's nothing in there worth anything. But whatever. Other Green efforts were also questionable, like the Bible curriculum that the Greens tried to roll out in public schools in Mustang, Oklahoma. The Greens developed the Bible class with some of the same scholars who would later join the Museum of the Bible. The class didn't teach the Bible as literature, but preached the Bible as objective truth. The, the curriculum didn't educate children about religion, it indoctrinated them. In the Greens' version of conservative Christianity, the Greens even sought to circumvent open meeting laws meant to ensure that school boards' transparency to smuggle the curriculum into schools. Working for the Freedom from Religious Foundation alongside the ACLU, America's United, I was able to stop this curriculum, a clear violation of Line 3. The Greens took it overseas to implement it in countries that didn't separate state and church. So when the Greens sued in September 2012 over the contraceptive mandate, which they tellingly referred to as the preventative care mandate in their lawsuit, this wasn't the first or last time they would use wealth and power to impose Christianity on others, nor was it the first time the Greens had been involved with the Crusaders. The Crusaders are a broad, if shadowy, front. They received massive funding from the National Christian Charitable Foundation and other wells of dark money. The largest funder of that foundation traced back to Hobby Lobby. The network is so well funded and vast that the Crusaders can craft virtually any case they like. So when Justice Sotomayor posed a difficult hypothetical to Hobby Lobby's lawyer about how courts could possibly determine the religious belief of a corporation, and added as an aside, just assume, not a business like yours, you picked great plaintiffs. But let's assume, everyone laughed, but it's also true. The Crusaders pick their plaintiffs and the case that they want to go to the Supreme Court, not vice versa. Yes, and they avoid paying taxes. And you wonder why people want to tax churches. I do. Tax them. I mean, they do pay some taxes, but I mean, they who is people, not a majority. Okay. The most effective crusade in the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, which brought the Hobby Lobby case. The Becket Fund is named after Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas A. Becket, because in its retelling, he stood resolutely at the intersection of church and state. Tom Becket is lionized today and sainted for his martyrdom at the hands of England's Henry II. Less well remembered is why he and Henry were feuding in the first place. In Britain, he seems to be remembered more honestly. One national poll ranked him in the second worst Briton ever, behind Jack the Ripper and ahead of King John, Henry II's son. To overstate the case only slightly, in addition to a question of missing funds, Henry thought one law should apply to everyone and that churchmen who, say, murdered someone should be tried in civil courts. The church, led by Becket, refused, demanding the ecclesiastical courts try criminous clerks, churchmen accused of any crime. He wanted one law for the Catholic clergy and a different, stricter law for everyone else. In other words, Becket was fighting for religious privilege. There is no record of Henry uttering the infamous line, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent or meddlesome or troublesome priest?" But he must have expressed some frustration because 4 knights murdered Becket in Canterbury Cathedral. To the extent Becket died for a principle, it wasn't for religious freedom, but for religious privilege. The Becket Fund fights for that privilege today. Becket's founder, Kevin Seamus Hassan, has a theology degree from Notre Dame and wrote the Christian nationalist book Believers, Thinkers, and Founders: How We Came to Be One Nation Under God. Becket fights for taxpayer-funded religious schools, for government-organized and led prayers, and against marriage equality and contraception. Becket even fought to keep a Christian prayer banner displayed in a public school. It recently funded a 1.6 million religious liberty clinic at Stanford Law School. Among the Crusaders, the Becket Fund is better at diversifying its clientele to include non-Christians, but it is still preoccupied with weaponizing religious freedom. One former employee explained that the ecumenicalism was self-interested, and also that Leonard Leo, the court packer, saved Becket twice by tapping his shadowy network for massive cash infusions. Becket awarded Leo its Canterbury Medal in 2017 for being a stalwart defender of religious liberty. So, one of the most successful and active crusaders is intimately involved in the network that packed the Supreme Court with justices that decided their case. When Becket and Greens crafted Hobby Lobby's challenge, they had allies on the Supreme Court. It was the first Supreme Court in American history without a Protestant, 6 Catholics and 3 Jews. The 5 Catholic men were all nominated by Republicans, and most had worked in Republican administrations. Alito wrote the controlling opinion. Becket's founder, Hassan, worked for Alito in Reagan's Justice Department, the job Alito got for writing that he opposed decisions separating state and church. It has always been a conservative and a lifelong registered Republican. It's remarkable that the 5 Catholic men comprise the majority, though remarking on its frowned upon because it suggests that their religious beliefs tainted their decisions. But we know it does, and that it did, and should reject this courtesy, which only protects the Crusaders. The Hobby Lobby decision is a nightmare for a number of reasons, but, above all, it was the first time the Crusaders' court violated Line 2. Alito's awful, illogical opinion turned religious freedom into a cudgel for misogyny, violating the rights of every Hobby Lobby employee in the name of their employer's God. Samuel Alito beat the plowshare into a sword. Exactly. And this was during a time where anti-Catholic sentiment was still prevalent. Remember, anti-Catholic sentiment goes all the way back to the 1800s. Actually, no, probably 1700s, actually. And that's why Catholicism was usually concentrated in the South. Alito's opinion is so poor that correcting it would be a standalone book. But here are 5 major failings that go to the religious freedom aspects of his opinion. And let's read through them. Religion trumps reality. The Bible never discusses contraception or abortion. That's not condemned in the various verses of the 10 Commandments or in the 613 mitzvot. Sure, the biblical God commands Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply, but we can multiply with a measure of reproductive choice. The two aren't mutually exclusive the way Christianity and women's rights seem to be. Despite this lack of a biblical mandate, the Greens believe their gods opposed abortion. In the first court filing, the Greens admitted that they had no religious objection to providing coverage for non-abortion causing contraceptive drugs and devices. The case could have ended there. The Greens challenged a few specific contraceptive drugs that don't cause abortions, but which they wrongly believed caused abortions, a belief unequivocally refuted by science, medicine, and reality. Will, you're missing the whole point. No, it was never as common in the North as it was in the South, and there's a reason for that. But do go on. A true impressive collection of doctors and professionals signed a brief addressing one question: are the drugs Hobby Lobby objects to, in fact, abortif- uh, abortifacients? No was the unequivocal answer. The scientific evidence confirms that the FDA approved forms of emergency contraceptives are not abortifacients. Preventing pregnancy is not the same as terminating pregnancy. The medical professional brief will a simple Google search would have saved you this. Why was Catholicism more active in the South? But whatever. Oh, let's see. Preventing pregnancy. Contraceptives prevent pregnancy. Abortifacients terminate a pregnancy. The brief explained the science. The drugs function by inhibiting or postponing ovulation. They do not prevent fertilization and implantation. The doctors and scientists spoke, and the Catholic men in the High Court ignored them and reality. Kind of like somebody in the chat. But that's okay, because the Greens professed a religious belief that these forms of contraception, which are not abortifacients or excuse me, or abortifacients. Anyway, okay, Alito accepted virtually without comment this erroneous belief about science and medicine are true. If the owners comply with HHS mandate, they believe they will be facilitating abortions. With that, the Supreme Court elevated an unsupported, unscientific religious belief in an unassailable perch, ignoring the evidence based scientific medical fact. Alternate facts trump science and reality. It was as if the Greens premised their case on a religious belief that the earth is flat or that water is composed of carbon rather than hydrogen and oxygen. And the court agreed. Even worse, Alito isn't simply rewarding false religious beliefs, he's giving beliefs that are held, in spite of all evidence to the contrary, special legal protection under the law. Truth matters less than the fervency with which a belief is held, which leads to a rather perverse incentives. Normally, the wrongness of a religious belief doesn't matter because line 2 ensures that the belief only impacts the believer. Courts blindly accept the truth of a religious belief is a standard rule, perhaps even a good rule when the impacts of the unexamined belief don't extend beyond the individual believer. That is, as long as line 2 is intact. While the truth of a belief is not open to question, the rule states there remains the significant question whether it is truly held. The courts might look at the sincerity of a belief, not the content. But if courts are going to pretend that line 2 doesn't exist and allow religious beliefs to harm or impact others, then courts must also examine the objective truth of a belief. You may believe that your God is telling you to sacrifice your child, and the court can accept that as true as long as it depends on the rights of everyone else against that belief. If, however, the court accepts that a belief is true and subjugates the rights of others to that belief, the religious freedom has been weaponized. Alito did just that. The end of this inevitable and road is worrisome and has profound implications for our right to contraception, especially in the light of leaked opinion overturning Roe v. Wade. Because if it can be argued or legally claimed that birth control causes abortion, even when it prevents pregnancy after Roe v. Wade is overturned, and reproductive freedom is a memory, the road to blocking access to contraception is cleared. That has always been the next step, as some of us have been saying for a long time. The Crusaders aren't hiding this agenda. Joyce Meyer Ministries argued in a brief that the contraceptive services mandate violates freedom of opinion because it encourages female sexual activity without risk of pregnancy. The contraceptives and counseling ensure that more and more women do not get pregnant unless they want to. That's a fairly clear call from forced pregnancy. It's less slouching toward Gilead than barreling at full throttle, Jesus at the wheel. Hobby Lobby's hypocrisy. Hobby Lobby's hypocrisy was given a free pass because in America to criticize or question religion is seen as vulgar or wrong. The rule just stated the courts cannot examine the truth of a religious belief, only its sincerity, is born partly of the American culture taboo against criticizing religion or suggesting that it's factually mistaken or morally insincere. Uh, Yet, American history gives plenty of examples of just that. My favorite date to Prohibition, which was foisted on the country largely by Christian temperance groups, the Volstead Act exempted sacramental wines and liquors as a insincere American piety exploded. One Jewish congregation grew overnight from 180 to 1,000 families. Catholic clergy and Jewish rabbis essentially became bootleggers under the legal fiction that they were providing sacramental wine to their newly pious flock. Oh, why are you pinning that? Hmm. Unfortunately, the judicial refusal to probe the truth of a belief is nearly always accompanied by an uncritical acceptance of its sincerity. So Hobby Lobby's blatant hypocrisy didn't matter in court. Alito pointed out that no one has disputed the sincerity of Hobby Lobby's religious beliefs. None of the justices asked Hobby Lobby why, if it was so crucial to the owner's religion. The company voluntarily covered those same drugs before the lawsuits. The Greens claimed that coverage of these drugs was not included knowingly or deliberately, but that doesn't explain why the company invested more than 73 million in the drug companies that manufacture these unchristian drugs and intrauterine birth control devices, emergency contraceptive pills, and drugs used in abortion procedures. Exactly. The Green family had no problem. They had no problem with investing their money into these companies that made these drugs and devices. They're okay with that. They're okay with that. It's amazing to me that there's they don't care as long as money is to be made. They're happy with investing their money into this. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Or why the company imports most of what it sells, perhaps 90% from China, a country that has suppressed Christianity and has abortion policies that had fellow Christians criticizing the Greens for sending American dollars there. Exactly. They're sending their money to a godless country to make their trinkets so that they can sell cheaply here in America. Isn't that amazing? Nor how a for-profit billion-dollar empire comports with the Christian duty Jesus expressed. If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. Yes, why aren't the Greens giving to the poor? Why aren't they giving their money in mass to the poor? Isn't that amazing? Oh, unbelievable. That's okay. I'm actually reading. Thank you. Uh, the Greens' sincerity should have been questioned, and even if the Greens were sincere, how do we know Hobby Lobby Stores Incorporated, which is not a person but a corporate entity dedicated to making money, actually cares about contraception? Hobby Lobby's transparent hypocrisy was legally irrelevant. Had its sincerity been challenged, a near impossibility given the taboo just mentioned, Alito could almost certainly have admonished the government for doing so and declared that it cannot require consistency from believers on religious freedom claims. No, they're not corporations ever. I don't care what the court says. They're not people. I mean, when is a corporation a person? In the history of ever. Yeah, no, I don't care what a religious fundamentalist court says. There is no law. Well, actually, you know what? Can you show me the law? Oh, the law determines right and wrong? Really? Slavery was legal under the law, wasn't it? You don't have any problem with that, do you? What else was determined by law? By law, women couldn't vote. It determines legal truth. Oh my God. No, it doesn't. Are you just trolling me just to see what my reaction's gonna get? Unbelievable. No shame in your game, huh? Let's see. When choice matters. Speaking of hypocrisy, there's hypocrisy in Alito's obtuse reasoning, too. The Supreme Court has used the true private choice of individuals to cut off possible state church violations. For instance, a decision chain featuring private choice cuts off the constitutional problem with line 3 when the government funds a neo voucher scheme, even if 96% of the money goes to religious schools. Taxpayer funds are flowing to a religious purpose, which is a clear violation of the First Amendment. But I'll talk about your anti-Asian race. Will, no. If you're gonna talk silly and stupid, you won't come up at all. So no, mm-mm. No, you won't. No, you said that. I didn't say Uyghurs belonged in cages. You said that. Your own mouth has condemned you. Will, you are a troll. You are not a serious person. Thank you for revealing that. See, this is what I like. I like when trolls reveal who they are ahead of time. I like it. They can't help themselves. They just revealed the whole game. They can't shut up. They have to keep talking and talking and talking. And lo and behold, he has revealed himself. Nah, I don't take you seriously, bud. Taxpayers funded, First Amendment, court pretended. Oh, yeah, the court pretended that private choice severed the chain and therefore the violation. However, when it came to the religious objection of a family who owned various trusts that owned a corporation that employed individuals, the court ignored the individual's choice. Let's see here. What can we do? We'll start there. Okay. Let's see. However, when it came to the religious objection of a family who owned various trusts that owned a corporation that employed individuals, the court ignored the individual's choice. Alito held that the Green family's religion was substantially burdened, despite a casual chain replete with individual choices. Science and reality clearly show drug X prevents pregnancy. It does not cause abortions. G believes that drug X cause abortions, not a religious belief. G believes his God is against abortions. That's a religious belief. G controls several distinct legal entities, including Trustee and V. Trustee and V own controlling shares in a corporation with limited liability, Company H. Company H buys health insurance plans for employees as required by law. Federal rules require the plan to cover certain medical services. H hires employee B at one of its stores. B goes to her doctor for a regular checkup. Dr. C recommends and prescribes drug X for B. B fills the prescription for X at a pharmacy. At a pharmacy Y. The insurance plans pharmacy Y for drug X. Y gives X to B. B personally chooses to take X. B takes X. B does not get pregnant. Therefore, A's religion is violated. That was the reasoning. One would think an employee exercising private choice in consultation with a doctor would sever the chain, but as with the Greens' religious objections, intellectual consistency is not required when, like Alito, you make the rules up as you go. There was no burden on the Greens' religion. This a causal chain, also known as no government burden on the Greens' religion, a prerequisite for a religious freedom case. Even if we ignore the chain, the fact that the corporations have no religion, no burden existed. The Green claimed the burden was paying out taxes to exercise their religion, but its company was actually saving money. Recall that businesses could opt out of the contraceptive mandate by paying more taxes. Assuming conservatively that Hobby Lobby paid $5,000 for health plans annually per employee, it had three options: pay $26 million a year in taxes and not provide health insurance, pay about $45 million a year for health insurance that meets the legal requirements, pay $520 million a year, $475 million in taxes plus the costs in option 2 for health insurance that doesn't meet the coverage requirements. Let's see. Let's get to the comments. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. The Constitution is trash. It doesn't work. It's not great. It needs to be revised, but to say that it's trash, I don't think we can go that far. No, it's called a mute. I need peace from it, the inanity. Anyway, the company could have saved millions with option 1. We don't know the exact numbers because Hobby Lobby never provided them. That failure should have tanked the case because the company was required to prove that a burden on its religion existed. But Alito allowed the Greens to simply assert that the company would have to pay taxes as a burden when it might have actually been saving money by paying the taxes rather than buying health insurance. To circumvent this problem, the company argued that the Greens' religion also required the company to provide health care to its employees. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg asked, covering their employees for health care, that is not a religious tenet, right? No, it actually is, Hobby Lobby responded. That tenet evaporated during the pandemic. Imagine. Moreover, the Greens, who have religious beliefs, could not have paid any additional taxes because the Greens are separate from their corporation, which has no religious beliefs. Hobby Lobby Stores Incorporated would have paid the taxes, and Hobby Lobby would have saved money. In the end, the court shifted the burden from the billion-dollar corporation to 13,000 employees. So the cost of the billionaire Greens practicing their religion is borne by their low-wage employees, just like Jesus would have wanted. Exactly. I'm keen to ask. I'm keen to find out, what Jesus are they actually worshiping? Alito rewrote the lines. Hobby Lobby wrongly claimed that the contraceptive mandate compelled Christians to act in a way that violated their faith. But recall our lines. Line 1. With the contraceptive mandate in place, the Greens still have unburdened, unlimited right to believe whatever counterfactual tenets they choose. Line 2. The mandate applies to companies with more than 50 employees, not billionaires. The Greens aren't acting. Corporations and trusts are. Corporations are created especially to protect their creators from the consequences of the corporation's actions. There would be no corporations, no corporate law, if not for the principle that corporations are separate from people. This separation is the entire purpose of corporations. The Greens don't even own Hobby Lobby Stores Incorporated. They own and operate the company through various trusts. A series of trusts protect the family and likely shields them from considerable tax liability. And then another layer of protection is added through the corporate structure. They rake in billions without personal risk. To ignore that and declare Christians exempt from the corporate shield is to rewrite American corporate law, which Alito did. The central question the RFRA presents, according to Justice Alito, is whether the HHS mandate imposes a substantial burden on the ability to objecting parties to conduct business in accordance with their religious beliefs. Alito's emphasis: this is obviously absolutely wrong. Citizens possess a limited right to exercise their religion. Line 2, not to conduct business through a corporation owned by trusts in which they have an interest, and then to pass their religion through those layers of legal armor to trample the rights of their employees. This is not religious freedom. Alito attempted to distract us from this massive rewrite of a corporate law with talk of closely held corporations, which means that more than 50% of the corporation stock is controlled by a few people. Mars, Uber, Koch Industries is also, or Koch Industries, are all closely held corporations, each with billions in revenue and tens of thousands of employees. Something like 90% of all American companies are closely held. The same goes for the family owned rhetoric. Walmart is a family owned business, even though it's the largest company in the world by revenue and number of people employed. They are meaningless distractions. Whatever the court had decided, the Greens personally would have been able to go to church, to pray, to worship, oppose abortions and contraceptives, and not get abortions or use contraception. They didn't pay anything. The soulless corporation did. The women of the court dissented, as did the non-Christians. Hobby Lobby is a sexist majoritarian decision. The first thing Ruth Bader Ginsburg points out in her brilliant dissent was the startling breadth of the decision. Anticipating the Crusaders' strategy, she heads off the argument that this case means anything for religious freedom under the First Amendment. The court does not pretend that the First Amendment free exercise clause demands religious-based accommodation so extreme. For our decision, leave no doubt on that score. She saw where the Crusaders wanted to take RFRA. Ginsburg, Sotomayor, Breyer, Kagan slammed Alito for departing from line 2. Our decision leaves no doubt that religious freedom cannot be wielded to impose religion on others. They highlighted cases spanning more than 5 decades where state and federal courts got line 2 right, rejecting Green's argument. The Supreme Court refused to let devout Christians discriminate against black Americans in the Piggy Park barbecue case. The Minnesota Supreme Court rebuffed born-again Christian business owners who refused, in violation of employment discrimination laws, to hire someone living with but not married to a person of the opposite sex, a young single woman working without her father's consent, or a married woman working without her husband's consent, or any person antagonistic to the Bible, including fornicators and homosexuals. And the New Mexico Supreme Court decision against a photography company that refused to photograph a lesbian couple's commitment ceremony because the Bible told them to, which a certain civil rights commissioner in Colorado would quote to a bakery, and which Kennedy would declare was hostility. Each time the courts held line 2, refusing to allow religious freedom claims to violate the rights of others. Religion is not a license to harm. The dissenters reminded Alito. Ginsburg also discussed a 1982 Supreme Court case decided under the First Amendment the Alito unconvincingly addressed. An Amish carpenter object on religious grounds to paying or withholding Social Security taxes. The court rejected the religious freedom challenge because to accept it and to give the carpenter an exemption would be to impose the employer's religious faith on the employees. It would violate line 2. That was not permissible under the First Amendment, but Alito held that it was under RFRA. The dissent laid the groundwork for undoing this awful decision, both for a future Supreme Court free of partisan hackery or Congress, which would repeal RFRA tomorrow. The shadow of that repeal is why the Crusaders are still fighting to graft this weaponized version of religious freedom onto the First Amendment. Even since the Hobby Lobby decision warped RFRA beyond what the strange coalition that created it intended, a campaign to repeal RFRA has been growing. Bills have been proposed to ensure that it cannot be used as a tool to discriminate, including the Do No Harm Act, which takes its name from the principle embodied in line 2. If Congress repealed RFRA tomorrow, court decisions based on RFRA, including this one, would be meaningless. However, if the Crusaders can successfully transfer RFRA's rewritten religious freedom to the First Amendment, then their weapon is the Constitution itself. This is the terrifying aspect of the crusade that Americans fail to grasp. Once the Supreme Court weaponizes religious freedom in the First Amendment, undoing that harm will require massive court expansion and reform, which we need anyway, or a constitutional amendment to alter the sacrosanct text of the First Amendment. Neither is easy. The final grafting of the bastardized religious freedom onto the First Amendment has not fully taken. For a self-proclaimed family of deep faith, there is something deeply profaned about the Hobby Lobby lawsuit. The Greens took the hallowed right and brought it down through RFRA, a hawking trifles. One American conservative writer, hoping for a Hobby Lobby win, put it like this: on the rare occasion that I enter the store, even amid the Chinese mass-produced crosses and piped-in Christian music, under the endless fluorescent lighting and displays carefully managed to optimize impulse buying, I am hardly moved to a state of piety, prayer, and thanksgiving. Millions of young Americans, millions of women, millions of empathetic people looked at the Greens' Christianity and rejected it. For all of their desire to impact eternity, the Greens drove Americans away from their God. The postscript. There's a rather long postscript to the Hobby Lobby case. Recall that the contraceptive mandate exempted religious orders and churches. The exemptions wasn't enough for the churches. They demanded more. They all but demanded that their employees not get contraception. The church exemption created a line 2 problem, the same problem with many argued for religious exemptions. The church exemption is a civil law that effectively imposes religious law on employees. For instance, imagine the local Catholic diocese hires an accountant, a young Catholic woman. It would inevitably label a bookkeeper. The exemption would apply to the diocese. If the diocese were not exempt, the bookkeeper would have a statutory right to no-cost birth control. However, give me a second. Okay. However, the exemption takes away her right to cost-free contraception. So the exemption is a civil law that allows employers to impose religious fiat on employees. Without some additional move by the government, this was not an exemption, but a weapon. To solve this line 2 problem, the government required insurance companies to bridge the gap in contraceptive coverage for employees for exempt religious entities at no cost to their religious employers. The federal government could even reimburse the insurance company. Religious employers don't provide the coverage, but patients get the coverage. It seemed a workable compromise for all, but the insurance company and the government needed to know which religious employers took the exception. So the government asked religious employers to fill out 5 blanks on a form and submit it. The entity name, name of individual filling out the form, mailing address, signature, and date. That's it. Religious orders and religious schools such as Notre Dame and Wheaton filed dozens of lawsuits claiming that this form burdened their religious freedom. One federal judge explained the novelty of Notre Dame's claim. Not for the exemption, which it has, but for the right to have it without having to ask for it. Even this description is too generous because religious organizations didn't have to ask for the exemption. They simply had to tell the government that they were taking it. And they didn't even have to use the form, which states, alternatively, an eligible organization may also provide notice to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. The real objection was to any system in which the employees gain an entitlement to contraceptive coverage for third parties, explained Solicitor General Donald Verrilli, and yet another challenge to the form, one brought by priests. On the National Day of Prayer in 2017, Trump singled out a group of nuns in a Rose Garden speech after he signed an executive order promoting religious liberty. We we all know too well the attacks against the little sisters of the poor. And then he spontaneously invited the nuns upstage. Come on up here, sisters, come on up here. Trump placed the nuns, impoverished by personal choice, on stage with the megachurch preachers Jack Graham and Paula White, skillfully exploiting the mascots for their cameras. Before this presidential recognition of their suffering, the Crusaders had paraded the Little Sisters of the Poor at every opportunity. Photos of the nuns descending the steps of the Supreme Court in their gray habits, smiling and waving as if on a homecoming float, became de rigueur for most publications. They were the perfect Crusader mascots for the war on contraception, women's rights, and health care. Pious women the media was incapable of criticizing. The Catholic nuns had Catholic friends on the court. Parroting Trump, Alito trotted the, um, the the protracted campaign against the Little Sisters of the Poor in his 2020 speech to the Federalist Society, saying that the nuns have been under unrelenting attack for the better part of a decade. Oh, that's so sad. Thank you for the gifts. I appreciate the gifts. Thank you. Thank you for the hearts. Thank you for the likes and the rose. Uh, what were the attacks Trump and Alito mentioned? The five blank forms, which these nuns challenged as a burden on their religious freedom: name, date, address, date, sign. That was a burden. They argued to the judge after judge for 9 years. The Supreme Court initially seemed to set to rule on the form when Justice Scalia died, and Mitch McConnell refused to consider his legitimately name replacement. So the court punted. Then the Trump administration killed the notification requirement and automatically exempted any religious organization or even the organization that had a moral objection to providing health care to employees. The careful ACA compromise was sabotage, and perhaps 126,000 people lost contraceptive coverage when the Supreme Court upheld the changes in 2020. Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor began their dissent by reasserting line 2 and then wrote, "Today, for the first time, the court cast totally aside countervailing rights and interests in its zeal to secure religious rights to the nth degree." The nuns argued a five blank form was a substantial burden on their religion. Compare that to how courts have decided what constitutes a burden on the right to an abortion. In 1992, the Supreme Court upheld the right to an abortion, but said that the government could regulate it so long as there was no undue burden on the right. At the time, Samuel Alito was an appellate judge on the court that heard the case before it got to the Supreme Court. He wrote a dissent that made him something of a star for the anti-abortion crowd. An undue burden on the right to an abortion certainly sounds like a lower bar than a substantial burden on religious freedom. But judges have been hypocritical. The judges have been proven hypocritical, forcing people to drive hundreds of miles to a clinic, often multiple times because the others were shut down by deliberate over-regulation. Or forcing the patient to hear a legislature-prescribed sermon, or inflicting, as 27 states do, medically unnecessary ultrasounds are not undue burdens on the rights of these patients. But nuns filling out five blanks on a form is supposedly a substantial burden on their religious freedom. The flagrant hypocrisy shows that many jurists aren't guided by legal principle. Religion, or perhaps Christian nationalism, seemed more like the court's guiding principle for overturning Roe v. Wade and abolishing reproductive freedom. This became suddenly clear to many observers when, as this book went to press in May 2022, the draft opinion overturning Roe leaked. Journalist Eleanor Cliff wrote, "There's no more pretending that religion doesn't play a role," while Sarah Posner called it the crowning achievement for a Christian nationalist movement. Jennifer Rubin correctly observed that it is meant to impose a particular set of Christian views on the entire country. Well, that's only just stating the obvious. 16 days before Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, the Supreme Court scheduled a conference on the case that ended the reproductive freedoms of 170 million Americans. Ginsburg died on September 19th, 2020, and the conference set for September 29th that would decide whether the High Court would hear this pivotal case was postponed, and then postponed again. It's easy to imagine that the justices were waiting to see what would happen with the election and any possible new justices before taking the case. Do you see why elections are important? Do you understand that now? I hope you do. You're not just electing a president or a legislature. You're possibly influencing the Supreme Court itself. And this is why we must be out at the polls every time they're open. When we abdicate our right and our privilege of voting, this is what we get. This is what we get. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation had Hillary been elected, had Kamala Harris been elected. This is it. Yeah, it actually goes back to Al Gore. I forgot about him. Yep. I mean, it's unreal. I got 2 more pages and then we're done. After delaying and rescheduling more than 20 times, the Supreme Court accepted a case out of Mississippi orchestrated specifically to weaken Roe v. Wade. The challenge was certain to succeed once Amy Coney Barrett replaced Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She proved pivotal in the fall of 2021 when the court allowed a Texas law that instituted mob rule over the womb to take effect, essentially banning all abortions in the state 2 weeks after a missed period, and enforcing that the rule with the bounty system and cash rewards of no less than $10,000. Mississippi was so confident after Barrett's confirmation that it actually overhauled its argument, making it more extreme. In its initial petition, Mississippi focused on restrictions on abortion before viability, but after Barrett was confirmed, Mississippi changed its substantive argument into an all-out assault on reproductive freedom as a concept and asked the court to overturn Roe v. Wade. Christian nationalist preacher and Trump acolyte Robert Jeffries discussed the case on Fox News, explaining the deal. We're going to see now that the justices do and if they uphold their part of the deal. I wonder what deal that is. Since when do justices make deals? Trump and McConnell put Barrett on the court, and the court finally ends Roe. That was the deal. The draft opinion that consummated that deal and overturned Roe was what was leaked. Justice Alito authored the draft, which appeared to have the support of Justices Thomas, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Those 5 justices would make it the law of the land. This draft is extreme and absolutist. The language aggressive and abrasive. It's utterly uncompromising. While cutting broadly across much of our understanding of the law, it sought to overturn Roe v. Wade. But the end of Roe is just the beginning. The Crusaders won't be satisfied until abortion and contraception are outlawed across the United States. Alito's draft opinion paid lip service to the idea of returning these issues to the states and to the people. The court could have decided a case like this at virtually any time, but waited until after it had completely gutted the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County in 2013, or Boronovich in 2020, and after it upheld partisan gerrymandering in Rutko and Common Cause in 2019. These decisions protected the power of the conservative white Christians who would otherwise be subsumed in a demographic tide that would keep them out of office for good. The measures empowered the shrinking demographic that's raging against the dying of its privilege, that wants to resurrect long-dead bans on contraception, Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965, gay marriage, Obergefell and Hodges in 2015. They want to criminalize being gay in Lawrence versus Texas 2003. Alito's opinion reads like a hit list with rights and decisions that have helped ensure equality for BIPOC women and LGBTQ people as the targets. The Crusaders will not stop until conservative white Christian men are a special privileged class and everyone else in the second-class cars. In short, they want a Christian nation. A Christian nationalist nation. And that's also why they have targeted Line 3. Line 3 has prevented religious extremists from realizing their Christian nationalist dream and has a major roadblock for opponents of reproductive rights because it forces them to talk about abortion in unfamiliar secular terms. Alito didn't mention religion or religious freedom, but his draft opinion began and ended with religion. Some will disagree because Alito's phrased it as morality, but that's the point. He's forced to adopt euphemisms for imposing his conservative Christianity on all of us. For a brief, clear moment during the oral argument, Justice Sotomayor cut through all the pretense and asked Mississippi, "How is your interest anything but a religious view?" The state fumbled for an answer. Like the Mississippi religious freedom law we saw earlier on, its abortion ban enshrines the belief of conservative Christians. So does Alito's draft opinion. The draft shows us the America that Justice Alito and 4 other justices want, even if it's diluted in the backlash to the leak or some behind-the-scenes horse trading. This is still the future they want. They want their conservative strain of religious freedom to trump the reproductive freedom of half the population. It's a bleak future. The war on women is really about conception, not contraception. They're coming for contraception, yes, but forced conception lies at the end of bans on abortion and contraception. Remember, Joyce Meyer Ministries said the quiet part out loud. Contraceptive ensures that women do not get pregnant unless they want to. I'm going to say that again. Women do not get pregnant unless they want to. Instead, they'll get pregnant when the biblical God wants them to. More accurately, when old white men say their God wants them to. The end. Chapter 11. We'll do that next. Religious freedom is killing us. The COVID case. Or cases. We have now reached the halfway point. We are now in the middle of the book. It's coming along swimmingly, and I got more books to read. Whew. With that, I'm going to end the streaming on the YouTubes. Give me 1 second. For those of you listening on YouTube, thank you so much for listening. See you on the next stream. Take care.